Chapter 22. This Venice, which was a haughty, invincible, magnificent republic for nearly 1400 years, whose armies compelled the world's applause whenever and wherever they battled, whose navies well-nigh held dominion of the seas, and whose merchant fleets whitened the remotest oceans with their sails and loaded these piers with the products of every clime, is fallen a prey to poverty, neglect, and melancholy decay. 600 years ago, Venice was the autocrat of commerce. Her mart was the great commercial center, the distributing house from whence the enormous trade of the Orient was spread abroad over the Western world. Today her piers are deserted, her warehouses are empty, her merchant fleets are vanished, her armies and her navies are but memories. Her glory is departed, and with her crumbling grandeur of wharves and palaces about her, she sits among her stagnant lagoons, forlorn and beggared, forgotten of the world. She that in her palmy days commanded the commerce of a hemisphere, and made the weal or woe of nations with a beck of her puissant finger, is become the humblest among the peoples of the earth, a peddler of glass beads for women, and trifling toys and trinkets for schoolgirls and children. The venerable mother of the republics is scarce a fit subject for flippant speech or the idle gossiping of tourists. It seems a sort of sacrilege to disturb the glamour of old romance that pictures her to us softly from afar off as through a tinted mist, and curtains her ruin and her desolation from our view. One ought, indeed, to turn away from her rags, her poverty and her humiliation, and think of her only as she was when she sunk the fleets of Charlemagne, when she humbled Frederick Barbarossa or waved her victorious banners above the battlements of Constantinople. We reached Venice at 8 in the evening, and entered a hearse belonging to the Grand Hotel d'Europe. At any rate, it was more like a hearse than anything else, though to speak by the card, it was a gondola. And this was the storied gondola of Venice, the ferry boat in which the princely cavaliers of the olden time were wont to cleave the waters of the moonlit canals and look the eloquence of love into the soft eyes of patrician beauties, while the gay gondolier in silken doublet touched his guitar and sang as only gondoliers can sing. This the famed gondola, and this the gorgeous gondolier. The one an inky, rusty old canoe with a sable hearse body clapped on to the middle of it, and the other a mangy, barefooted guttersnipe with a portion of his raiment on exhibition which should have been sacred from public scrutiny. Presently, as he turned a corner and shot his hearse into a dismal ditch between two long rows of towering, untenanted buildings, the gay gondolier began to sing, true to the traditions of his race. I stood it a little while. Then I said, "Now here, Rodrigo Gonzalez Michael Angelo, I'm a pilgrim, and I'm a stranger, but I am not going to have my feelings lacerated by any such caterwauling as that. If that goes on, one of us has got to take water. It is enough that my cherished dreams of Venice have been blighted forever as to the romantic gondola and the gorgeous gondolier. This system of destruction shall go no farther. I will accept the hearse, under protest, and you may fly your flag of truce in peace, but here I register a dark and bloody oath that you shan't sing." Another yelp, and overboard you go. I began to feel that the old Venice of song and story had departed forever. But I was too hasty. In a few minutes, we swept gracefully out into the Grand Canal, and under the mellow moonlight the Venice of poetry and romance stood revealed. Right from the water's edge rose long lines of stately palaces of marble. Gondolas were gliding swiftly hither and thither, and disappearing suddenly through unsuspected gates and alleys, ponderous stone bridges threw their shadows athwart the glittering waves. There was life and motion everywhere, and yet everywhere there was a hush, a stealthy sort of stillness that was suggestive of secret enterprises of bravos and of lovers. And clad half in moonbeams and half in mysterious shadows, the grim old mansions of the Republic seemed to have an expression about them of having an eye out for just such enterprises as these at that same moment. Music came floating over the waters. Venice was complete. It was a beautiful picture, very soft and dreamy and beautiful. But what was this Venice to compare with the Venice of midnight? Nothing. There was a fete, a grand fete in honor of some saint who had been instrumental in checking the cholera 300 years ago, and all Venice was abroad on the water. It was no common affair, for the Venetians did not know how soon they might need the saint's services again, now that the cholera was spreading everywhere. So in one vast space, say, a third of a mile wide and 2 miles long, were collected 2,000 gondolas, and every one of them had from 2 to 10, 20, and even 30 colored lanterns suspended about it, and from 4 to a dozen occupants. Just as far as the eye could reach, these painted lights were massed together like a vast garden of many-colored flowers, except that these blossoms were never still. They were ceaselessly gliding in and out and mingling together and seducing you into bewildering attempts to follow their mazy evolutions. Here and there a strong red, green, or blue glare from a rocket that was struggling to get away splendidly illuminated all the boats around it. Every gondola that swam by us, with its crescents and pyramids and circles of colored lamps hung aloft, and lighting up the faces of the young and the sweet-scented and lovely below, was a picture. And the reflections of those lights, so long, so slender, so numberless, so many-colored and so distorted and wrinkled by the waves, was a picture likewise, and one that was enchantingly beautiful. Many and many a party of young ladies and gentlemen had their state gondolas handsomely decorated, and ate supper on board, bringing their swallow-tailed, white-cravatted varlets to wait upon them, and having their tables tricked out as if for a bridal supper. They had brought along the costly globe lamps from their drawing rooms, and the lace and silken curtains from the same places, I suppose. And they had also brought pianos and guitars, and they played and sang operas, while the plebeian paper-lanterned gondolas from the suburbs and the back alleys crowded around to stare and listen. There was music everywhere, choruses, string bands, brass bands, flutes, everything. I was so surrounded, walled in, with music, magnificence, and loveliness, that I became inspired with the spirit of the scene, and sang one tune myself. However, when I observed that the other gondolas had sailed away, and my gondolier was preparing to go overboard, I stopped. The fete was magnificent. They kept it up the whole night long, and I never enjoyed myself better than I did while it lasted. What a funny old city this Queen of the Adriatic is. Narrow streets, vast, gloomy marble palaces, black with the corroding damps of centuries and all partly submerged. No dry land visible anywhere, and no sidewalks worth mentioning. If you want to go to church, to the theater, or to the restaurant, you must call a gondola. It must be a paradise for cripples, for verily a man has no use for legs here. For a day or two the place looked so like an overflowed Arkansas town, because of its currentless waters laving the very doorsteps of all the houses, and the cluster of boats made fast under the windows, or skimming in and out of the alleys and byways, that I could not get rid of the impression that there was nothing the matter here but a spring freshet, and that the river would fall in a few weeks and leave a dirty high-water mark on the houses, and the streets full of mud and rubbish. In the glare of day, there is little poetry about Venice, but under the charitable moon her stained palaces are white again, their battered sculptures are hidden in shadows, and the old city seems crowned once more with the grandeur that was hers 500 years ago. It is easy, then, in fancy, to people these silent canals with plumed gallants and fair ladies with shylocks in gabardine and sandals, venturing loans upon the rich argosies of Venetian commerce with Othellos and Desdemonas, with Agos and Rodrigos, with noble fleets and victorious legions returning from the wars. In the treacherous sunlight we see Venice decayed, forlorn, poverty-stricken, and commerceless, forgot, and utterly insignificant. But in the moonlight, her 14 centuries of greatness fling their glories about her, and once more is she the princeliest among the nations of the earth. There is a glorious city in the sea. The sea is in the broad, the narrow streets ebbing and flowing, and the salt seaweed clings to the marble of her palaces. No track of men, no footsteps to and fro, lead to her gates. The path lies o'er the sea invisible, and from the land we went, as to a floating city steering in, and gliding up her streets as in a dream, so smoothly, silently, by many a dome mosque-like and many a stately portico. The statues ranged along an azure sky, by many a pile in more than eastern pride, of old the residence of merchant kings, the fronts of some, though time had shattered them, still glowing with the richest hues of art, as though the wealth within them had run o'er. What would one naturally wish to see first in Venice? The Bridge of Sighs, of course, and next the church and the great square of St. Mark, the bronze horses, and the famous lion of St. Mark. We intended to go to the Bridge of Sighs, but happened into the Ducal Palace Fursta building, which necessarily figures largely in Venetian poetry and tradition. In the Senate chamber of the ancient republic, we wearied our eyes with staring at acres of historical paintings by Tintoretto and Paul Veronese. But nothing struck us forcibly, except the one thing that strikes all strangers forcibly: a black square in the midst of a gallery of portraits. In one long row, around the Great Hall, were painted the portraits of the Doges of Venice, venerable fellows, with flowing white beards. For of the 300 senators eligible to the office, the oldest was usually chosen Doge. And each had its complimentary inscription attached till you came to the place that should have had Marino Faliero's picture in it, and that was blank and black blank, except that it bore a terse inscription, saying that the conspirator had died for his crime. It seemed cruel to keep that pitiless inscription still staring from the walls after the unhappy wretch had been in his grave 500 years. At the head of the giant staircase, where Marino Faliero was beheaded, and where the Doges were crowned in ancient times, 2 small slits in the stone wall were pointed out, 2 harmless, insignificant orifices that would never attract a stranger's attention, yet these were the terrible lions' mouths. The heads were gone, knocked off by the French during their occupation of Venice. But these were the throats, down which went the anonymous accusation, thrust in secretly at dead of night by an enemy, that doomed many an innocent man to walk the bridge of sighs and descend into the dungeon which none entered and hoped to see the sun again. This was in the old days, when the patricians alone governed Venice. The common herd had no vote and no voice. There were 1,500 patricians. From these, 300 senators were chosen. From the senators, a doge and a council of 10 were selected, and by secret ballot the 10 chose from their own number a council of 3. All these were government spies then, and every spy was under surveillance. Himself men spoke in whispers in Venice, and no man trusted his neighbor, not always his own brother. No man knew who the council of 3 were, not even the Senate, not even the doge. The members of that dread tribunal met at night in a chamber to themselves, masked and robed from head to foot in scarlet cloaks, and did not even know each other, unless by voice. It was their duty to judge heinous political crimes, and from their sentence there was no appeal. A nod to the executioner was sufficient. The doomed man was marched down a hall and out at a doorway into the covered bridge of sighs, through it and into the dungeon and unto his death. At no time in his transit was he visible to any save his conductor. If a man had an enemy in those old days, the cleverest thing he could do was to slip a note for the council of 3 into the lion's mouth, saying, "This man is plotting against the government." If the awful 3 found no proof, 10 to 1 they would drown him anyhow, because he was a deep rascal, since his plots were unsolvable. Masked judges and masked executioners, with unlimited power, and no appeal from their judgments, in that hard, cruel age, were not likely to be lenient with men they suspected yet could not convict. We walked through the hall of the Council of 10, and presently entered the infernal den of the Council of 3. The table around which they had sat was there still, and likewise the stations where the masked inquisitors and executioners formerly stood, frozen, upright, and silent, till they received a bloody order, and then, without a word, moved off like the inexorable machines they were, to carry it out. The frescoes on the walls were startlingly suited to the place. In all the other saloons, the halls, the great state chambers of the palace, the walls and ceilings were bright with gilding, rich with elaborate carving, and resplendent with gallant pictures of Venetian victories in war and Venetian display in foreign courts, and hallowed with portraits of the Virgin, the Savior of men, and the holy saints that preached the gospel of peace upon earth. But here, in dismal contrast, were none but pictures of death and dreadful suffering. Not a living figure but was writhing in torture, not a dead one but was smeared with blood, gashed with wounds, and distorted with the agonies that had taken away its life. From the palace to the gloomy prison is but a step. One might almost jump across the narrow canal that intervenes. The ponderous stone bridge of sighs crosses it at the second story, a bridge that is a covered tunnel you cannot be seen when you walk in it. It is partitioned lengthwise, and through one compartment walked such as bore light sentences in ancient times, and through the other marched sadly the wretches whom the 3 had doomed to lingering misery and utter oblivion in the dungeons, or to sudden and mysterious death. Down below the level of the water, by the light of smoking torches, we were shown the damp, thick-walled cells where many a proud patrician's life was eaten away by the long-drawn miseries of solitary imprisonment without light, air, books. Naked, unshaven, uncombed, covered with vermin, his useless tongue forgetting its office with none to speak to. The days and nights of his life no longer marked, but merged into one eternal eventless night. Far away from all cheerful sounds, buried in the silence of a tomb. Forgotten by his helpless friends, and his fate a dark mystery to them forever, losing his own memory at last, and knowing no more who he was or how he came there, devouring the loaf of bread and drinking the water that were thrust into the cell by unseen hands, and troubling his worn spirit no more with hopes and fears and doubts and longings to be free. Ceasing to scratch vain prayers and complainings on walls where none, not even himself, could see them, and resigning himself to hopeless apathy, driveling childishness, lunacy. Many and many a sorrowful story like this these stony walls could tell if they could but speak. In a little narrow corridor, nearby, they showed us where many a prisoner, after lying in the dungeons until he was forgotten by all save his persecutors, was brought by masked executioners and garroted or sewed up in a sack, passed through a little window to a boat at dead of night, and taken to some remote spot and drowned. They used to show to visitors the implements of torture, wherewith the three were wont to worm secrets out of the accused villainous machines for crushing thumbs. The stocks where a prisoner sat immovable, while water fell drop by drop upon his head, till the torture was more than humanity could bear. And a devilish contrivance of steel, which enclosed a prisoner's head like a shell, and crushed it slowly by means of a screw. It bore the stains of blood that had trickled through its joints long ago, and on one side it had a projection whereon the torturer rested his elbow comfortably, and bent down his ear to catch the moanings of the sufferer perishing within. Of course, we went to see the venerable relic of the ancient glory of Venice, with its pavements worn and broken by the passing feet of 1,000 years of plebeians and patricians, the Cathedral of St. Mark. It is built entirely of precious marbles. Brought from the Orient, nothing in its composition is domestic. Its hoary traditions make it an object of absorbing interest to even the most careless stranger, and thus far it had interest for me, but no further. I could not go into ecstasies over its coarse mosaics, its unlovely Byzantine architecture, or its 500 curious interior columns from as many distant quarries. Everything was worn out, every block of stone was smooth and almost shapeless with the polishing hands and shoulders of loungers who devoutly idled here in bygone centuries and have died and gone to the Devno. Simply died, I mean. Under the altar repose the ashes of St. Mark and Matthew, Luke and John too, for all I know. Venice reveres those relics above all things earthly. For 1,400 years, St. Mark has been our patron saint. Everything about the city seems to be named after him, or so named as to refer to him in some way so named, or some purchase, rigged in some way to scrape a sort of hurrahing acquaintance with him. That seems to be the idea. To be on good terms with St. Mark seems to be the very summit of Venetian ambition. They say St. Mark had a tame lion, and used to travel with him, and everywhere that St. Mark went, the lion was sure to go. It was his protector, his friend, his librarian. And so the winged lion of St. Mark, with the open Bible under his paw, is a favorite emblem in the grand old city. It casts its shadow from the most ancient pillar in Venice, in the grand square of St. Mark, upon the throngs of free citizens below, and has so done for many a long century. The winged lion is found everywhere, and doubtless here, where the winged lion is, no harm can come. St. Mark died at Alexandria, in Egypt. He was martyred, I think. However, that has nothing to do with my legend. About the founding of the city of Venice 450 years after Christ, for Venice is much younger than any other Italian city. A priest dreamed that an angel told him that until the remains of St. Mark were brought to Venice, the city could never rise to high distinction among the nations, that the body must be captured, brought to the city, and a magnificent church built over it. And that if ever the Venetians allowed the saint to be removed from his new resting place, in that day Venice would perish from off the face of the earth. The priest proclaimed his dream, and forthwith Venice set about procuring the corpse of St. Mark. One expedition after another tried and failed, but the project was never abandoned during 400 years. At last it was secured by stratagem, in the year 800 and something. The commander of a Venetian expedition disguised himself, stole the bones, separated them, and packed them in vessels filled with lard. The religion of Mahomet causes its devotees to abhor anything that is in the nature of pork. And so, when the Christian was stopped by the officers at the gates of the city, they only glanced once into his precious baskets, then turned up their noses at the unholy lard and let him go. The bones were buried in the vaults of the Grand Cathedral, which had been waiting long years to receive them, and thus the safety and the greatness of Venice were secured. And to this day there be those in Venice who believe that if those holy ashes were stolen away, the ancient city would vanish like a dream, and its foundations be buried forever in the unremembering sea. Chapter 23. The Venetian gondola is as free and graceful in its gliding movement as a serpent. It is 20 or 30 feet long and is narrow and deep, like a canoe. Its sharp bow and stern sweep upward from the water like the horns of a crescent, with the abruptness of the curves slightly modified. The bow is ornamented with a steel comb with a battle-axe attachment, which threatens to cut passing boats in two occasionally, but never does. The gondola is painted black, because in the zenith of Venetian magnificence, the gondolas became too gorgeous altogether, and the Senate decreed that all such display must cease, and a solemn, unembellished black be substituted. If the truth were known, it would doubtless appear that rich plebeians grew too prominent in their affectation of patrician show on the Grand Canal, and required a wholesome snubbing. Reverence for the hallowed past, and its traditions keeps the dismal fashion in force now that the compulsion exists no longer. So let it remain. It is the color of mourning. Venice mourns. The stern of the boat is decked over, and the gondolier stands there. He uses a single or a long blade, of course, for he stands nearly erect. A wooden peg, 1.5 feet high, with 2 slight crooks or curves in one side of it and one in the other, projects above the starboard gunwale. Against that peg, the gondolier takes a purchase with his oar, changing it at intervals to the other side of the peg or dropping it into another of the crooks, as the steering of the craft may demand and how in the world he can back and fill, shoot straight ahead, or flirt suddenly around a corner, and make the oar stay in those insignificant notches, is a problem to me and a never-diminishing matter of interest. I am afraid I study the gondolier's marvelous skill more than I do the sculptured palaces we glide among. He cuts a corner so closely, now and then, or misses another gondola by such an imperceptible hairbreadth that I feel myself scrooching, as the children say, just as one does when a buggy wheel grazes his elbow. But he makes all his calculations with the nicest precision, and goes darting in and out among a Broadway confusion of busy craft with the easy confidence of the educated hackman. He never makes a mistake. Sometimes we go flying down the great canals at such a gait that we can get only the merest glimpses into front doors. And again, in obscure alleys in the suburbs, we put on a solemnity suited to the silence, the mildew, the stagnant waters, the clinging weeds, the deserted houses, and the general lifelessness of the place, and move to the spirit of grave meditation. The gondolier is a picturesque rascal for all he wears no satin harness, no plumed bonnet, no silken tights. His attitude is stately, he is lithe and supple, all his movements are full of grace. When his long canoe, and his fine figure, towering from its high perch on the stern, are cut against the evening sky, they make a picture that is very novel and striking to a foreign eye. We sit in the cushioned carriage body of a cabin, with the curtains drawn and smoke, or read, or look out upon the passing boats, the houses, the bridges, the people, and enjoy ourselves much more than we could in a buggy jolting over our cobblestone pavements at home. This is the gentlest, pleasantest locomotion we have ever known. But it seems queer ever so queer to see a boat doing duty as a private carriage. We see businessmen come to the front door, step into a gondola instead of a streetcar, and go off downtown to the counting room. We see visiting young ladies stand on the stoop, and laugh, and kiss goodbye, and flirt their fans and say, "Come soon now, do you've been just as mean as ever you can be mothers dying to see you and we've moved into the new house. Oh, such a love of a place. So convenient to the post office and the church, and the Young Men's Christian Association. And we do have such fishing, and such carrying on, and such swimming matches in the backyardo, you must come no distance at all. And if you go down through by St. Mark's and the Bridge of Sighs, and cut through the alley and come up by the Church of Santa Maria dei Frari, and into the Grand Canal, there isn't a bit of current now do come, Sally Maria bye-bye. And then the little humbug trips down the steps, jumps into the gondola, says under her breath, disagreeable old thing, I hope she won't. Goes skimming away, round the corner, and the other girl slams the street door and says, well, that infliction's over anyway, but I suppose I've got to go and see her tiresome stuck-up thing. Human nature appears to be just the same all over the world. We see the diffident young man, mild of mustache, affluent of hair, indigent of brain, elegant of costume, drive up to her father's mansion, tell his hackman to bail out and wait, start fearfully up the steps and meet the old gentleman right on the threshold. Hear him ask what street the new British Bank is in as if that were what he came for, and then bounce into his boat and scurry away with his coward heart in his boots. See him come sneaking around the corner again, directly, with a crack of the curtain open toward the old gentleman's disappearing gondola, and out scampers his Susan with a flock of little Italian endearments fluttering from her lips, and goes to drive with him in the watery avenues down toward the Rialto. We see the ladies go out shopping, in the most natural way, and flit from street to street and from store to store, just in the good old fashion, except that they leave the gondola, instead of a private carriage, waiting at the curbstone a couple of hours for them waiting, while they make the nice young clerks pull down tons and tons of silks and velvets and moire antiques and those things. And then they buy a paper of pins and go paddling away to confer the rest of their disastrous patronage on some other firm. And they always have their purchases sent home, just in the good old way. Human nature is very much the same all over the world. And it is so like my dear native home to see a Venetian lady go into a store and buy 10 cents worth of blue ribbon and have it sent home in a scow. Ah, it is these little touches of nature that move one to tears in these far-off foreign lands. We see little girls and boys go out in gondolas with their nurses for an airing. We see staid families, with prayer book and beads, enter the gondola dressed in their Sunday best and float away to church. And at midnight, we see the theater break up and discharge its swarm of hilarious youth and beauty. We hear the cries of the hackman gondoliers, and behold the struggling crowd jump aboard, and the black multitude of boats go skimming down the moonlit avenues. We see them separate here and there, and disappear up divergent streets. We hear the faint sounds of laughter and of shouted farewells floating up out of the distance. And then, the strange pageant being gone, we have lonely stretches of glittering water, of stately buildings, of blotting shadows, of weird stone faces, creeping into the moonlight, of deserted bridges, of motionless boats at anchor. And over all broods that mysterious stillness, that stealthy quiet that befits so well this old dreaming Venice. We have been pretty much everywhere in our gondola. We have bought beads and photographs in the stores, and wax matches in the great square of St. Mark. The last remark suggests a digression. Everybody goes to this vast square in the evening. The military bands play in the center of it, and countless couples of ladies and gentlemen promenade up and down on either side. And platoons of them are constantly drifting away toward the old cathedral, and by the venerable column with the winged lion of St. Mark on its top, and out to where the boats lie moored. And other platoons are as constantly arriving from the gondolas and joining the great throng. Between the promenaders and the sidewalks are seated hundreds and hundreds of people at small tables, smoking and taking granita, a first cousin to ice cream. On the sidewalks are more employing themselves in the same way. The shops in the first floor of the tall rows of buildings that wall in 3 sides of the square are brilliantly lighted. The air is filled with music and merry voices, and altogether the scene is as bright and spirited and full of cheerfulness as any man could desire. We enjoy it thoroughly. Very many of the young women are exceedingly pretty and dress with rare good taste. We are gradually and laboriously learning the ill manners of staring them unflinchingly in the face, not because such conduct is agreeable to us, but because it is the custom of the country and they say the girls like it. We wish to learn all the curious, outlandish ways of all the different countries, so that we can show off and astonish people when we get home. We wish to excite the envy of our untraveled friends with our strange foreign fashions, which we can't shake off. All our passengers are paying strict attention to this thing, with the end in view which I have mentioned. The gentle reader will never know what a consummate ass he can become until he goes abroad. I speak now, of course, in the supposition that the gentle reader has not been abroad and therefore is not already a consummate ass. If the case be otherwise, I beg his pardon and extend to him the cordial hand of fellowship and call him brother. I shall always delight to meet an ass after my own heart when I shall have finished my travels. On this subject, let me remark that there are Americans abroad in Italy who have actually forgotten their mother tongue in 3 months, forgot it in France. They cannot even write their address in English in a hotel register. I append these evidences, which I copied verbatim from the register of a hotel in a certain Italian city. John P. Whitcomb edats unis. W.M. 50. Ainsworth Travelour, he meant traveler, I suppose, edats unis. George P. Morton et Fils d'Amérique. Lloyd B. Williams et Trois Amis, Ville de Boston, Amérique. J. Ellsworth Baker, Tout de Suite de France, Place de Naissance Amérique, Destination La Grande-Bretagne. I love this sort of people. A lady passenger of ours tells of a fellow citizen of hers who spent 8 weeks in Paris, and then returned home and addressed his dearest old bosom friend Herbert as Mr. Herbert. He apologized, though, and said, "'Pon my soul, it is aggravating, but I can't help it, I have got so used to speaking nothing but French. My dear Herbert, damn, there it goes again. Got so used to French pronunciation that I can't get rid of it. It is positively annoying, I assure you." This entertaining idiot, whose name was Gordon, allowed himself to be hailed 3 times in the street before he paid any attention, and then begged 1,000 pardons, and said he had grown so accustomed to hearing himself addressed as 1,000 Siu Gorardong, with a roll to the R, that he had forgotten the legitimate sound of his name. He wore a rose in his buttonhole. He gave the French salutation 2 flips of the hand in front of the face. He called Paris Perry in ordinary English conversation. He carried envelopes bearing foreign postmarks protruding from his breast pocket. He cultivated a mustache and imperial, and did what else he could to suggest to the beholder his pet fancy that he resembled Louis Napoleon, and, in a spirit of thankfulness which is entirely unaccountable, considering the slim foundation there was for it, he praised his Maker that he was as he was, and went on enjoying his little life just the same as if he really had been deliberately designed and erected by the great architect of the universe. Think of our Whitcombs, and our Ainsworths and our Williamses writing themselves down in dilapidated French in foreign hotel registers. We laugh at Englishmen, when we are at home, for sticking so sturdily to their national ways and customs, but we look back upon it from abroad very forgivingly. It is not pleasant to see an American thrusting his nationality forward obtrusively in a foreign land, but oh, it is pitiable to see him making of himself a thing that is neither male nor female, neither fish, flesh, nor foul, a poor, miserable, hermaphrodite Frenchman. Among a long list of churches, art galleries, and such things visited by us in Venice, I shall mention only one, the Church of Santa Maria dei Frari. It is about 500 years old, I believe, and stands on 1,200,000 piles. In it lie the body of Canova and the heart of Titian, under magnificent monuments. Titian died at the age of almost 100 years. A plague which swept away 50,000 lives was raging at the time, and there is notable evidence of the reverence in which the great painter was held, in the fact that to him alone the state permitted a public funeral in all that season of terror and death. In this church also is a monument to the Doge Foscari, whose name a once resident of Venice, Lord Byron, has made permanently famous. The monument to the Doge Giovanni Pesaro, in this church, is a curiosity in the way of mortuary adornment. It is 80 feet high, and is fronted like some fantastic pagan temple. Against it stand 4 colossal Nubians, as black as night, dressed in white marble garments. The black legs are bare, and through rents in sleeves and breeches, the skin of shiny black marble shows. The artist was as ingenious as his funeral designs were absurd. There are 2 bronze skeletons bearing scrolls, and 2 great dragons uphold the sarcophagus. On high, amid all this grotesqueness, sits the departed Doge. In the conventual buildings attached to this church are the state archives of Venice. We did not see them, but they are said to number millions of documents. They are the records of centuries of the most watchful, observant, and suspicious government that ever existed, in which everything was written down and nothing spoken out. They fill nearly 300 rooms. Among them are manuscripts from the archives of nearly 2,000 families, monasteries, and convents. The secret history of Venice for 1,000 years is here: its plots, its hidden trials, its assassinations, its commissions of hireling spies and masked bravos, food, ready to hand, for a world of dark and mysterious romances. Yes, I think we have seen all of Venice. We have seen, in these old churches, a profusion of costly and elaborate sepulchre ornamentation, such as we never dreamt of before. We have stood in the dim religious light of these hoary sanctuaries, in the midst of long ranks of dusty monuments and effigies of the great dead of Venice, until we seemed drifting back into the solemn past, and looking upon the scenes and mingling with the peoples of a remote antiquity. We have been in a half-waking sort of dream all the time. I do not know how else to describe the feeling. A part of our being has remained still in the 19th century, while another part of it has seemed in some unaccountable way walking among the phantoms of the 10th. We have seen famous pictures until our eyes are weary with looking at them and refuse to find interest in them any longer. And what wonder, when there are 1,200 pictures by Palma the Younger in Venice and 1,500 by Tintoretto. And behold, there are Titians and the works of other artists in proportion. We have seen Titian's celebrated Cain and Abel, his David and Goliath, his Abraham's sacrifice. We have seen Tintoretto's monster picture, which is 74 feet long and I do not know how many feet high, and thought it a very commodious picture. We have seen pictures of martyrs enough and saints enough to regenerate the world. I ought not to confess it, but still, since one has no opportunity in America to acquire a critical judgment in art, and since I could not hope to become educated in it in Europe in a few short weeks, I may therefore as well acknowledge, with such apologies as may be due, that to me it seemed that when I had seen one of these martyrs I had seen them all. They all have a marked family resemblance to each other, they dress alike, in coarse monkish robes and sandals, they are all bald-headed, they all stand in about the same attitude, and without exception they are gazing heavenward with countenances which the Ainsworths, the Mortons, and the Williamses, et fils, inform me are full of expression. To me there is nothing tangible about these imaginary portraits, nothing that I can grasp and take a living interest in. If great Titian had only been gifted with prophecy, and had skipped a martyr, and gone over to England and painted a portrait of Shakespeare, even as a youth, which we could all have confidence in now, the world down to the latest generations would have forgiven him the lost martyr in the rescued seer. I think posterity could have spared one more martyr for the sake of a great historical picture of Titian's time, and painted by his brush, such as Columbus returning in chains from the discovery of a world, for instance. The old masters did paint some Venetian historical pictures, and these we did not tire of looking at, notwithstanding representations of the formal introduction of defunct doges to the Virgin Mary in regions beyond the clouds clashed rather harshly with the proprieties, it seemed to us. But humble as we are, and unpretending in the matter of art, our researches among the painted monks and martyrs have not been wholly in vain. We have striven hard to learn. We have had some success. We have mastered some things, possibly of trifling import in the eyes of the learned, but to us they give pleasure, and we take as much pride in our little acquirements as do others who have learned far more, and we love to display them full as well. When we see a monk going about with a lion and looking tranquilly up to heaven, we know that that is Saint Mark. When we see a monk with a book and a pen, looking tranquilly up to heaven, trying to think of a word, we know that that is Saint Matthew. When we see a monk sitting on a rock, looking tranquilly up to heaven with a human skull beside him, and without other baggage, we know that that is Saint Jerome. Because we know that he always went flying light in the matter of baggage. When we see a party looking tranquilly up to heaven, unconscious that his body is shot through and through with arrows, we know that that is Saint Sebastian. When we see other monks looking tranquilly up to heaven, but having no trademark, We always ask who those parties are. We do this because we humbly wish to learn. We have seen 13,000 St. Jeromes, and 22,000 St. Marks, and 16,000 St. Matthews, and 60,000 St. Sebastians, and 4 millions of assorted monks, undesignated, and we feel encouraged to believe that when we have seen some more of these various pictures and had a larger experience, we shall begin to take an absorbing interest in them like our cultivated countrymen from Amérique. Now it does give me real pain to speak in this almost unappreciative way of the old masters and their martyrs, because good friends of mine in the ship friends who do thoroughly and conscientiously appreciate them, and are in every way competent to discriminate between good pictures and inferior ones have urged me for my own sake not to make public the fact that I lack this appreciation and this critical discrimination myself. Believe that what I have written and may still write about pictures will give them pain, and I am honestly sorry for it. I even promised that I would hide my uncouth sentiments in my own breast. But alas, I never could keep a promise. I do not blame myself for this weakness, because the fault must lie in my physical organization. It is likely that such a very liberal amount of space was given to the organ which enables me to make promises, that the organ which should enable me to keep them was crowded out. But I grieve not. I like no halfway things. I had rather have one faculty, nobly developed, than two faculties of mere ordinary capacity. I certainly meant to keep that promise, but I find I cannot do it. It is impossible to travel through Italy without speaking of pictures, and can I see them through others' eyes? If I did not so delight in the grand pictures that are spread before me every day of my life by that monarch of all the old masters, nature, I should come to believe, sometimes, that I had in me no appreciation of the beautiful whatsoever. It seems to me that whenever I glory to think that for once I have discovered an ancient painting that is beautiful and worthy of all praise, the pleasure it gives me is an infallible proof that it is not a beautiful picture, and not in any wise worthy of commendation. This very thing has occurred more times than I can mention, in Venice. In every single instance, the guide has crushed out my swelling enthusiasm with the remark, "It is nothing, it is of the Renaissance." I did not know what in the mischief the Renaissance was, and so always I had to simply say, so it is I had not observed it before. I could not bear to be ignorant before a cultivated Negro, the offspring of a South Carolina slave. But it occurred too often for even my self-complacency did that exasperating, "It is nothing, it is of the Renaissance." I said at last, "Who is this Renaissance? Where did he come from? Who gave him permission to cram the Republic with his execrable daubs?" We learned then that Renaissance was not a man. That Renaissance was a term used to signify what was at best but an imperfect rejuvenation of art. The guide said that after Titian's time and the time of the other great names we had grown so familiar with, high art declined. Then it partially rose again, an inferior sort of painters sprang up, and these shabby pictures were the work of their hands. Then I said, in my heat, that I wished to goodness high art had declined 500 years sooner. The Renaissance pictures suit me very well, though sooth to say at school were too much given to painting real men and did not indulge enough in martyrs. The guide I have spoken of is the only one we have had yet who knew anything. He was born in South Carolina, of slave parents. They came to Venice while he was an infant. He has grown up here. He is well educated. He reads, writes, and speaks English, Italian, Spanish, and French with perfect facility, is a worshipper of art and thoroughly conversant with it, knows the history of Venice by heart and never tires of talking of her illustrious career. He dresses better than any of us, I think, and is daintily polite. Negroes are deemed as good as white people in Venice, and so this man feels no desire to go back to his native land. His judgment is correct. I have had another shave. I was writing in our front room this afternoon, and trying hard to keep my attention on my work and refrain from looking out upon the canal. I was resisting the soft influences of the climate as well as I could, and endeavoring to overcome the desire to be indolent and happy. The boys sent for a barber. They asked me if I would be shaved. I reminded them of my tortures in Genoa, Milan, Como, of my declaration that I would suffer no more on Italian soil. I said, "Not any for me, if you please." I wrote on. The barber began on the doctor. I heard him say, "Dan, this is the easiest shave I have had since we left the ship." He said again, presently, "Why, Dan, a man could go to sleep with this man shaving him." Dan took the chair. Then he said, "Why, this is Titian. This is one of the old masters." I wrote on. Directly Dan said, "Doctor, it is perfect luxury. The ship's barber isn't anything to him. My rough beard we distressing me beyond measure." The barber was rolling up his apparatus. The temptation was too strong. I said, "Hold on, please. Shave me also." I sat down in the chair and closed my eyes. The barber soaped my face, and then took his razor and gave me a rake that well-nigh threw me into convulsions. I jumped out of the chair. Dan and the doctor were both wiping blood off their faces and laughing. I said it was a mean, disgraceful fraud. They said that the misery of this shave had gone so far beyond anything they had ever experienced before, that they could not bear the idea of losing such a chance of hearing a cordial opinion from me on the subject. It was shameful, but there was no help for it. The skinning was begun and had to be finished. The tears flowed with every rake, and so did the fervent execrations. The barber grew confused and brought blood every time. I think the boys enjoyed it better than anything they have seen or heard since they left home. We have seen the Campanile, and Byron's house and Balby's the geographer, and the palaces of all the ancient dukes and doges of Venice, and we have seen their effeminate descendants airing their nobility in fashionable French attire in the grand square of St. Mark, and eating ices and drinking cheap wines, instead of wearing gallant coats of mail and destroying fleets and armies as their great ancestors did in the days of Venetian glory. We have seen no bravos with poisoned stilettos, no masks, no wild carnival, but we have seen the ancient pride of Venice, the grim bronze horses that figure in 1,000 legends. Venice may well cherish them, for they are the only horses she ever had. It is said there are hundreds of people in this curious city who never have seen a living horse in their lives. It is entirely true, no doubt. And so, having satisfied ourselves, we depart tomorrow, and leave the venerable Queen of the Republics to summon her vanished ships, and marshal her shadowy armies, and know again in dreams the pride of her old renown.